in the preliminary budget plan, 117 million was added for NYPD uniform overtime spending. How do you properly evaluate the reduction targets when half of the projected overtime cost gets added throughout the year?
I'll let our Deputy Commissioner answer, but we are taking an approach now where we're really looking at our spend month to month. So at the end of January, at the end of February. Do you want to?
So essentially what we do is we recognize that there's a certain amount budgeted at the beginning of the year, but we look also at the historical trends month to month. There are different events that happen in different months. There's a level of seasonality within what we do. We're obviously looking at unplanned events like protests and things like that. So my team of staff and analysts are looking at the overtime really on a weekly basis, and then month to month we're looking at the overall spend compared to prior years. What did it look like in the prior month? Where are things trending? What are the different categories? To look at where we may see some concerns or some issues.
So historically, you would see an uptick in overtime in specific months, right? Depending on the activity that's happening in the city?
Correct.
Okay. Who is the Deputy Commissioner or equivalent identified by the NYPD who's responsible for compliance to the overtime reduction plan?
That's me.
That would be you?
Tanya.
Oh, okay. And has OMB deemed any overtime expenditures to be in excessive against your planned reduction targets?
So at this point, actually, we reestablished a target with OMB at the end of the last calendar year, very end of the last calendar year, beginning of this year, sort of reevaluating what things look like, taking into account the additional transit overtime once that was announced. And we are holding, in January, we were a little bit below our target. In February, pretty much on target.
And both the Deputy Commissioner and I have regular meetings with Director Jiha on our overtime spend.
In the preliminary plan, 583 million of the 595 million fiscal year 2025 NYPD uniform overtime budget is located in the Chief of Department program area. Do you find it concerning that the Chief of Department oversees almost all of the uniform overtime spending after the scandal with the previous Chief of Department's misuse of the overtime approvals?
As I mentioned, our first Deputy Commissioner is in charge of overtime management. Her partner in that is our Deputy Commissioner of Management and Budget.
Okay. Did you, let me see. Where was, I don't want to ask that. We've already spoken about that. Okay. I'm not going to ask about that either. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not being duplicative here. All right, on the points of agreement. Oh, sorry. This one? Okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. You mentioned in your testimony that, I mean, we understand that we have an attrition rate, problem and hiring problem. But you mentioned that you have 5,335 officers that are eligible for retirement this year. What is your retention plan to try to get some of those officers to stay, considering that, you're having such a hard time recruiting?
Each officer needs to make the right decision for themselves and their families. That is what comes first. The higher than normal level, that attrition that we may see this year is driven by a number of factors. Among them, as I mentioned, 20 years ago, we did a lot of hiring at the NYPD. So a lot of officers this year are hitting their 20th year and are newly eligible for retirement. Add to that the fact that many of their pensions the value of their pensions are dictated by how much overtime they earned the prior year and how much overtime was worked last year. So I am not going to pretend like we can control who's going to retire or when, or that any policies and procedures that I put in place will affect that. Fact of the matter is, we need to do a better job managing overtime, and we can, and we will. And if officers make the decision that it's best for themselves and their families to retire, that'll happen. The most I can do, and what I'm very focused on doing, is doing whatever I can to hire enough officers to meet attrition with the intent of ultimately raising the number of uniformed police officers that we have at the NYPD.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of friends that are police officers, and, you know, many of them would say, I think, that there are a lot of variables that contribute, not just, you know, coming up on their retirement year. Have we changed that cycle so that we're not having all of the classes at on the same year, so that we're not running into the same pattern in another 10, 15 years?
Well, we're hopefully going to hire several thousand officers this year. So hiring at the NYPD has historically been lumpy.
Yeah.
And this year it will continue to be lumpy. But I agree with you that the goal ultimately is to even out year to year the number of the department's hiring.
Yeah. Regarding the quality of life unit, I'm a little bit confused about how it would work, because the way that I understand it, at least specifically in my district, most of my precincts are understaffed already. So how many officers from that specific precinct will be reassigned to this unit, and what impact, if any, will that have on?
So a few things are going to happen. First, we are going to return more officers to the precincts to be part of these quality of life teams, these Q teams. But we are also going to include officers that are currently working other assignments in the precincts to the Q teams. So as an example, the NCOs who are already in the precincts, they will be part of the quality of life teams.
Okay. Have many of the NCOs been reassigned already, though?
No.
No? Okay.
We still have NCOs in all of our commands.
Okay. I don't know why I'm on the clock, but okay. I had one final question regarding the, and I just want to, I want to premise this, so that we've seen since specifically after the COVID pandemic, an increase in quality of life calls in my neighborhood. A lot of them are attributed to a higher rate of fentanyl sales that are happening within our community, that are also then trickling into a lot of the petty thefts that you're seeing in the local CVS and Target, right? Because people are looking for money to be able to get high, and so they're stealing things and selling them, and therefore, but what I haven't seen is an effort to really combat this problem. We had a similar issue with the synthetic marijuana increase several years ago, and then there seemed like there was a concerted effort to, specifically look for, the dealers, the big fish, right? I don't want to see the quality of life team arresting drug users, because I think that they are the symptom of a larger problem. I would love to see more emphasis on the actual drug dealing that's happening in our communities, that's contributing to all of these quality of life issues. What does that conversation look like? Because when I call, I'm always told, well, narcotics is dealing with that, and that can take years for them to build a case. And oftentimes I don't believe that. I don't believe the narcotics is there and that they're doing anything, because, when we get in there and we're aggressive about it, you see an immediate reduction in the complaints that the, community is calling about. But I can't keep an officer on a corner, in perpetuity. Like, that's just not sustainable. So I would really love to hear more about what efforts are being made to address this fentanyl crisis that's impacting the entire city.
So I understand your feedback, and I agree with a lot of the feedback that you shared. I also want you to know that the NYPD, largely through the Detective Bureau, works on a huge number of long-term cases that are going after exactly what you described. So that work very much is ongoing, and I understand that it can be frustrating that those cases do take time, but when we take down those cases, it makes a big impact in the precincts where those people are operating for a long time to come. But that work has by no means subsided.
Okay, I get that there is a process, right, for, you know, the bigger fish, but in the interim, what happens is then you have 2 or 3 years where the quality of life in a specific, you know, location, like we had on 125th Street, like I see on 116th Street. I park my car there, you know, every now and then, and I watch, and I know who the drug dealers are. You know, it's pretty evident they're selling in the middle of the day. I mean, anybody can see that. But yet I have to take that extra step to kind of force, you know, police presence in those communities so that my constituents feel safe, you know, riding in and out of the subways.
Yes, and as I mentioned in my testimony, focusing on specific zones where we're seeing pockets of crime or real problems, 125th Street among them. When we add additional officers to those zones, we've seen extraordinary crime reductions. And so I, by no means, in my previous answer, want to minimize the work that those officers have done in those zones.
Yeah, they've been fantastic. But again,
And again, it underscores
present.
why we need to continue to hire cops in New York City.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm happy to I just want to say that I am impressed with a lot of the changes that you have made, and I am really grateful because I think that part of the attrition issue is that people have lost confidence in the NYPD. And when I say in the NYPD, I don't mean the officers that are in our precincts. They've lost, you know, they've lost trust in the commissioners, right? Because a lot of the times, you know, when you have cases where there has been, you know, a level of misconduct, the reprimand doesn't seem to come fast enough, right? And so we understand that the majority of the police department is made up of men and women who, you know, just want to make the city better, who, you know, are not, you know, doing the wrong thing. But when officers are doing the wrong thing, we expect that there's going to be a consequence, right? That because they're police officers doesn't give them immunity to, you know, commit what we consider to be, you know, a crime. And so with that, I'll just ask, you know, I know that I'm just going to put it out there. We submitted a letter to you last week regarding Lieutenant Jonathan Rivera and the Deputy Commissioner Maldonado's recommendation that he be fired. I think that this is an opportunity where, you know, folks are looking at you, I guess, and your leadership to help, right, bring some justice to this family. And I hope that I'm not sure if you've seen the letter, but that you consider it. You know, when I see that video of that interaction, you know, I'm heartbroken. There was a lot of things that went wrong, and I hope that there is also an effort as a consequence to that to provide more training on how to conduct, you know, a traffic stop, because I don't know that people understand when you're stopped if you've ever been stopped before. Have any of you ever been stopped? Anybody no? Okay. So I have, a lot of us have, right? And so I think that that's the point. I was driving one day, minding my business through 96th Street, get off the highway, I'm going home up the First Avenue, and there were officers that had stopped a vehicle on the left of me. And I looked at the officers because I was just being nosy, and then one officer and I made eye contact, and I immediately, like, you know, looked away because that's my instinctive, you know, thing. I instinctively know I'm not gonna, you know, I don't wanna look at the cop because I don't want any trouble. This police officer got in his car and he followed me all the way to 117th Street and stopped me. You never know how you're gonna react. I get very nervous and I get very, you know, aggressive a little bit. I'm like, why are you stopping me? And but the nerves take a hold of it, right? That adrenaline kicks in. Because I knew that he was stopping me for no reason, just because we made eye contact a few blocks down. And that happens every single day in my community. And those are the things that, you know, I don't think that there's an appreciation for on the other side, is like, how does a person, you know, react to a stop is an important part of that training process, right? Is that they may, right, not be as compliant as you may want to. So there has to be a different way of conducting these stops. And I really would appreciate just, maybe at some point having a larger conversation with you offline about some of our experiences, because I think that we just want to be heard, right? Like the rest of New York City, we want to be heard, and we want to address some, injustices that exist in the current way that we do things, while also ensuring that police officers are safe.
Thank you. I will look forward to that conversation. I'll just briefly note, as I said in my testimony, I did a review, similar data to the monitor, of our disciplinary system as or how we discipline officers as it relates to unconstitutional stops or things associated with stops. So, for example, failure to activate a body camera, failure to fill out a stop report. And while I believe that retraining is an important piece of the disciplinary process for things that are unintentional, one-off mistake, it is certainly not appropriate for repeated conduct or for intentional misconduct.
Yeah.
And what I saw was that too often, or virtually all the time for those types of things, the only discipline that we were meting out was retraining. And that makes our disciplinary system both not fair and
Yes.
not credible. And so under the leadership of our Deputy Commissioner for Legal Matters, we are overhauling that. And this is not like a several-month process to overhaul it. I put out a memo virtually that day that says this practice ends now. We called in our supervisors in our commands that are most problematic, and our general counsel instructed them on how the disciplinary system or the disciplinary paradigm was changing as it relates to stops. We are further beating that into the culture of the department through the use of compliance stat, which is a process that is mostly devoted to reviewing stops and body camera footage of stops and stop reports and holding precinct commanders accountable. There needs to be accountability in the New York City Police Department for this type of thing, and unless and until there is, it will continue. But I believe that the vast majority of cops, they want to do the right thing, and that the New York City Police Department has made a tremendous amount of progress in this area. The main thing that is outstanding right now is putting our money where our mouth is as it relates to discipline, and that is exactly what we are doing.
And I believe in your leadership, and I believe that you're, an ethical individual. Everybody speaks very highly of you and your leadership style, and I think that that is important, because in this case, this officer, specifically, is costing the city and
I want to be very clear. I'm not commenting.
No, I don't want you to comment.
My comments were not about that specific
understood.
case.
I'm just. What I'm saying is that not only this officer, but officers that are being charged with misconduct, that are being upheld, are costing the city millions and millions of dollars in lawsuits, and that's a problem. That's a problem. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you. We're going to pass it to Councilmember